Okay, picture this. The date is October 10th, 1943. It's a cold, raw morning at Thorpe Abbotts airbase in England, and the air is just thick with the smell of high-octane fuel and anticipation. A mission is about to kick off that will go down in the history books of air warfare.
So on this morning, 13 B-17 flying fortresses from the 100th Bomb Group claw their way into the sky. And remember, that's not just 13 planes. That's over 130 young men all crammed inside, believing this is just another incredibly dangerous day at the office over enemy territory.
But here's the thing. By the time the sun set that very same day, the sky over Thorpe Abbotts was going to be chillingly, tragically empty. Because out of those 13 bombers that left, only a single battered B-17 would limp its way back from the German city of Münster.
Now let's back up to the mission briefing. The mood in the room was already tense, as you can imagine. The pilots, including a guy named Robert Rosenthal of the B-17 Royal Flush, were about to find out their target, and for a lot of them, it was going to be a real gut check.
Hearing that target sent a literal shockwave through the room. See, up until this point, their missions had been strategic. Factories, U-boat pens, things that directly supported the war effort. But targeting the historic heart of a city, especially on a Sunday during Mass, well, that was a whole different kind of mission.
And you could just feel the room split. For some guys, like their leader, Major John Egan, who'd lost a lot of friends, this was payback, rightful revenge. But for others, like the crew of the Royal Flush, this felt wrong. There was a real moral conflict happening right there before they even stepped into their planes.
And to make matters even worse, Rosenthal's plane, the Royal Flush, gets assigned to the most dangerous position in the entire formation, tail end Charlie. That means they're the last plane in the box, the most vulnerable, the one that any attacking fighters are going to go for first. It's basically like having a giant kick me sign on your tail.
So the bomber stream heads out over Holland and pushes deeper and deeper into Germany. The tension is just climbing with every single mile. Now, the whole theory of these daylight bombing raids was that these B-17s, packed together in a tight formation, bristling with machine guns, could defend themselves. But that whole theory, it depended on one very critical element.
And pretty soon, that question starts crackling over the radios. Where's our fighters? Gunners are scanning the skies, pilots are searching the horizon. They'd been promised a huge escort of P-47 Thunderbolts to protect them. But the sky was completely, unnervingly empty.
And here's the devastating truth, the one the crews didn't know yet. The fighters were never coming. Awful weather back on the ground in England had kept them from ever taking off, so the bombers were completely, utterly on their own. The entire strategic bet had failed before the first shot was even fired.
And then they saw it. A dark cloud of specks on the horizon, just growing larger and larger. This wasn't weather, it was a swarm of German interceptors. We're talking hundreds of Focke-Wulf 190s and Messerschmitt 109s, and they were converging on this unprotected bomber stream like sharks that smell blood in the water.
What happened next was just a catastrophic, textbook chain reaction. Major Egan's lead plane takes a hit, loses power, and has to slow down. The planes flying right behind him, well, they slow down too to try and protect him. But in doing so, they create this fatal gap, separating themselves from the main bomber force and turning their small group into an isolated, perfect target for the German fighters.
The radio traffic just became an absolute nightmare. Frantic calls, shouts, and then sudden, chilling silence. And from their spot at the very back, the crew of the Royal Flush had a horrifying front row seat. They were forced to just watch as their friends' planes were ripped apart by cannon fire, exploding into fireballs or just spiraling out of the sky.
Now, as they finally got close to Münster, the storm of fighters started to pull back a bit, but it was like jumping out of the frying pan and straight into the fire. They were replaced by a storm of anti-aircraft fire, flak, and with most of the other bombers already shot down, every single gun on the ground was now aimed at the few who were left.
And it was right then that a German rocket slammed into the wing of the Royal Flush. The explosion just instantly obliterated 2 of their 4 engines, crippling the aircraft and sending it into a violent, gut-wrenching shudder.
Then came the moment of total, absolute isolation. The bombardier watched in pure horror as the last 2 B-17s flying in front of them were hit directly by flak and just disintegrated. In a flash, the Royal Flush was it. They were the last plane of the 100th Bomb Group still over the target.
Incredibly, despite the absolute chaos, they completed their mission. The bombardier yelled out, "Bombs away," and Rosie Rothenthal immediately threw the crippled plane into a steep dive, breaking every rule in the book to get away from the flak. Their duty was done. Now the fight for their lives had begun.
The flight home was nothing short of an epic. Rosenthal flew that battered B-17 like a fighter plane, making it an impossible target. The tail gunner, Sergeant de Blasio, was just fighting back furiously, actually shooting down several of the German fighters trying to finish them off. But they were still taking heavy damage. 2 of the gunners were badly wounded, and to stay in the air, the crew started throwing everything they could overboard. Guns, ammo, anything that wasn't bolted down, just to shed weight.
Back at Thorpe Abbotts, the hours just dragged on. The scheduled return time came and went. Other bomb groups were landing, their missions over. But the patch of sky where the 100th plane should have been, it stayed hauntingly empty. A terrible, heavy silence just settled over the entire airfield.
And then, someone spotted it. A single speck in the distance. A lone plane, limping home. It was the Royal Flush, just riddled with holes, trailing smoke from its 2 dead engines, but somehow, miraculously, still flying. As it touched down, the ground crews just watched in stunned silence.
The reality of that silence was just devastating. Of the roughly 130 men from the 100th who took off that morning, only 10, the crew of the Royal Flush, came back to base. All the others, the men in those other 12 planes, were either killed in action or were about to become prisoners of war.
That one mission, that single horrific day over Münster, is what forever cemented the 100th Bomb Group's nickname in history, a name that said everything about their incredible courage and their catastrophic losses.
They became the Bloody 100th. And this wasn't just some catchy name. It became a badge of honor, worn by the men who survived. But it was also a haunting reminder of the immense sacrifice that was demanded by the strategy of unescorted daylight bombing over Europe.
The survival of the Royal Flush is just an unbelievable story of skill, courage, and a healthy dose of impossible luck. But it leaves you with this really sobering question about war, doesn't it? When you're faced with odds like that, what does it really take to be the one plane, the one crew that makes it home when everyone else is gone?